All aboard the hype train, everybody! Welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans, to another incredibly exciting episode of Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales 101. And boy, oh boy, do we have a lot of awesome news to dive into today. With Miles Morales now being less than 1 month away until its worldwide release, it was only inevitable that Insomniac, Marvel, and Sony would eventually put the marketing into high gear. Because today, we have once again received another major news bomb for Miles Morales in its entirety. But even crazier, this news actually comes from a multitude of amazing sources. Not only did Insomniac Games post another Daily Bugle news report, which does dive into a very interesting amount of story details pertaining to the underground enemy faction, but it's also been officially confirmed that the brand new Game Informer issue that is going to feature exclusive coverage of the game in action is of course revolving around none other than Miles Morales. And just knowing that we have now finally come full circle with a complete Game Informer coverage of Spider-Man PS4 all the way back in April 2018, which is now being followed by its successor of Miles Morales coming on both the PS4 and PS5 is just simply incredible. And in case you're unaware, Andrew Reiner, who is currently the editor-in-chief over at Game Informer magazine, did write the previous cover story for Spider-Man PS4. And as you would expect, he has now returned to fully write the cover story for Miles Morales. I think we can all agree that Andrew Reiner did a sensational job back in 2018 when fully covering everything that we needed to know about Spider-Man PS4 before that game launched. And given the fact that he's back again to write Miles Morales' story, I can guarantee you that we are in for an absolute treat. But before we dive into the massive article relating to the cover story, I do want to briefly break down the brand new information that Insomniac Games posted about the Daily Bugle news report. So previously, Insomniac did post on social media an in-game universe article from the Daily Bugle, which did analyze Miles Morales as well as some other story beats where he is trying to become his own Spider-Man. But this time around, we did receive some very intriguing insights as to exactly what the game's main antagonists are up to within the universe of Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. And even though the information that is stated here doesn't necessarily analyze anything new, it still provides a lot of context to the overall world that Insomniac is continuing to expand. And once again, within the universe of Marvel's Spider-Man, the story itself was written by Robbie Robertson at the Daily Bugle, with photos by Lance Brannon. And as the article's title states, out from the shadows, crime rates dip thanks to Spider-Man, but is a new gang threatening the calm. Spider-Man has spent the last year making our city the safest it's ever been. He unmasked Kingpin as real estate mogul Wilson Fisk, exposed Mr. Negative as philanthropist Martin Lee, and knocked out Magia Don Hammerhead, aka Joseph Martello. He even prevented catastrophe by thwarting last year's Raft jailbreak, orchestrated by mad scientist Otto Octavius and carried out by supervillains Rhino, Vulture, Electro, and Scorpion, all of which are facing lifelong sentences at the Raft. Since then, a lack of formation and respect within the lower ranks have leaderless henchmen turning on each other. But the Underground, a wily gang assumed to have disbanded after last year's events, has resurfaced as an organized neon-lit crew with startling high-tech weaponry. Eyewitnesses report that the Underground has joined the gang brawls, picking off the last of Raft-bound Boss's lieutenants. They've even gone so far as to brazenly claim they're more powerful than the city's most notorious crime boss, aka Kingpin. Just when New Yorkers have started to feel safe again, the gang's reemergence has reminded us all that this is the city that never sleeps. What is the Underground planning? And will either of the Spider-Men step up to shut them down? So again, just like what we saw within the gameplay demo for Miles Morales, both the Underground as well as Roxxon are going to have a very prominent role within the game's story. And considering how much firepower the Underground appears to have, especially with the Tinkerer helping them out every chance she gets, it's surely going to be very interesting to see exactly what Roxxon is going to do in order to combat the Underground throughout New York City. Not to mention how Miles himself is planning to take everyone out in order to bring peace back to New York. But moving on to the meat and potatoes of the news itself, we actually have two separate magazine outlets covering Miles Morales in full. The first of which obviously comes from Game Informer magazine, but the second one is a little bit more under the radar. And as this news report was initially translated by Jamatsu over on Twitter, it did go on to describe the October 15th due issue of Weekly Famitsu will feature a cover story on Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, including an interview with Insomniac Games. And in case you're interested, other titles that will be featured within the issue include RE Village, DMC5 Special Edition, Atelier Ryuza 2, Guilty Gear Strive, and Ghost of Tsushima. Tsushima. So even though this might be an international magazine, it still is going to be extremely interesting to see exactly what the interview featuring Insomniac Games is going to entail, and whether or not this magazine's interview will potentially feature any other information which wasn't described by Game Informer. But above all else, this just goes to show how heavily Insomniac, Marvel, and Sony are trying to market Miles Morales before its main launch. And given the fact we're receiving all this spectacular coverage from a multitude of various sources, I for one couldn't be happier. But of course, the main factor that has us all extremely hyped today is none other than the official Game Informer magazine reveal of Miles Morales' cover story, where in classic Game Informer fashion, they did release a very brief coverage trailer simply displaying small glimpses of Miles Morales in action. And even though we only got to see bits and pieces of Miles Morales swinging throughout New York City, as well as him fighting enemies within new bases and wearing alternate suits within the game, everything that this title will feature simply looks absolutely breathtaking, especially considering the fact that all that is running on a PS5. But alongside that brand new coverage trailer, Andrew Reiner himself did go on Game Informer's website and post a full article describing what we can expect in the days to come revolving around this game. And again, if you simply recall the massive amounts of hype that we experienced for Spider-Man PS4 with that Game Informer coverage, I think you'll have a good idea as to what we can expect from Miles. But no matter what, it's still 110% hype nonetheless. So as Andrew went on to describe, with also a brand new screenshot of Miles Morales and Peter Parker in action as Spider-Man, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales exclusive coverage. Join us for a deep dive into Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, a sequel that cranks the superhero action up a notch and gives us an intimate look at the life of another wall crawler who is in way over his head in crime fighting, relationships, and getting to know his new home. Developer Insomniac Games gave us a lengthy tour of Spider-Man Miles Morales running on PlayStation 5, and we were blown away by just how ambitious of a follow-up it is, both in how explosive the action is right out of the gates, and how much care went into developing Miles as a new Spider-Man. Our cover story runs across 15 pages, and offers exclusive details for the opening moments of the game, Miles' powers, the open world, unlockable suits, the new skill tree, and so much more. We also spent a day talking to the development team about what makes this sequel different, and what players can expect from it on both PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. In addition to our cover story, which hits digital today and mailboxes soon, we will have a full month of Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales coverage online, complete with exclusive videos, screenshots, and developer interviews. And to put the cherry on top of all this amazing news, when Game Informer did do the initial cover story for Spider-Man PS4, the famous comic book artist Alex Ross was the one who created a brand new image of Peter Parker soaring across New York City while wearing the advanced suit. And lo and behold, Miles Morales is getting the same treatment. And in similar fashion, it does come from an artist who helped bring him to life within the comic books, where this time around, instead of Alex Ross himself, the great Sarah Pichelli created exclusive artwork for Game Informer's cover that gives you a look at Miles and his new neighborhood in Harlem. And as you can see from the image in full, I do really like the overall visual aesthetic that the cover is going for. Although for me personally, nothing can ever really top the Alex Ross artwork that we did receive of Spider-Man PS4 back for Game Informer's cover in 2018, but still, I do really appreciate Sarah Pichelli coming in to draw her own version of Miles Morales within the Insomniac Games universe. And seeing that be showcased even further with the snowy environment of Marvel's New York is just a great addition to this cover as a whole. Now for the brand new gameplay footage itself, not only does it look like it's going to run incredibly smooth on a PS5, but we also see a hint as to a brand new gameplay feature which was not originally included within Spider-Man PS4. And during this combat sequence, it does say clear as day that one of the side objectives that you do have to complete when fighting all these enemies in this one new base is in fact performing 5 separate ceiling takedowns. So right off the bat, one of the biggest complaints within Spider-Man PS4 is that the stealth did feel a bit unpolished, where even though you could take out enemies in a stealthful way either when you are on the ground or above them on rafters, you surprisingly couldn't stealth take them out while you were crawling on a wall or even on a ceiling. But given what we see right here, it obviously looks like Insomniac took that feedback into consideration. And if that's just one of the many other additions that Miles is going to have included within his playstyle for his own game, it makes me that much more curious to see exactly what the other upgrades are going to be for the swinging, combat, and more. And speaking of upgrades, it looks like that is more than likely the case for Miles Morales, both on a visual aesthetic as well as its overall gameplay features. Now, even though all all this information and brand new screenshots that you are about to see do come directly from Game Informer themselves, I do want to give two major shoutouts to Shinobi602 on Twitter, as well as fellow Spidey fan and amazing Spidey Squad member Khaled Brooks, for they did an absolutely great job for posting all this information to the general public who wasn't actually able to read the digital version of Game Informer's brand new cover story. And if these details alone don't get you hyped, then I'm not sure what else will. So as Shinobi pointed out for Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, the game will progress the narrative forward for both Peter Parker and Miles Morales. And since this newer version of Spider-Man is still being used to becoming Spider-Man on his own and learning as he goes on, Miles' animations will look visually less fluid and refined. And obviously, as the title of the game would suggest, there is going to be a heavy emphasis on Miles' story, given the fact that he is actually going to be the only playable character within the entire game. So in short, even though we might be able to expect Peter Parker and even Mary Jane to appear within the story, we will only be able to play as Miles during the main narrative. And something which took me completely by surprise is that there's apparently going to be even bigger set pieces than Spider-Man PS4. Moving on once again in classic Insomniac fashion, we are going to receive unannounced villains which we have not seen yet be featured in the game. And even though we do have brand new concept art of a classic Spidey villain returning for Miles Morales, I do think it's safe to say that we can definitely expect other classic Spidey villains to appear down the line. And while I'm still heavily hoping for a villain like Beetle to appear, I think it's safe to say that the game's main antagonist will most likely be Aaron Davis, aka the Prowler. Still, whether or not that actually ends up happening, we'll just have to wait and see. Next up on the list is actually a brand new gameplay feature called Friendly Neighborhood Spider App. Players can use the touchpad on the DualShock PS4 controller and even the DualSense PS5 controller to quickly pick activities, crimes, and so on from Miles' phone without going into a separate menu. And lastly, even though this is a small but rather interesting tidbit nonetheless, is that there will be an improved dynamic camera placement during combat. Now, while that may not seem like a massive game-changing addition in the grand scheme of things, I still think that the Friendly Neighborhood Spider app's description is simply an amazing idea. That's also been a major personal pet peeve of mine, is that for whatever reason, a majority of PS4 games don't really seem to utilize the touchpad in any way, shape, or form with their overall gameplay mechanics. So knowing that we are going to be receiving a lot of touchpad capabilities for Miles Morales on both the PS4 and PS5 is just a great factor to know about. And knowing that Miles Morales is indeed a cross-generation game for both the PS4 and PS5, it's surely going to bring a brand new perspective once we do see comparison videos of the two games playing on the separate systems. But if anything, even though the PS5 version will look absolutely gorgeous, I'm still hoping that the PS4 version will run and play just as fine. However, if these brand new screenshots are any indication as to what we can expect for Miles Morales running on a PS5, then I think that this game is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. For starters, we do have some brand new screenshots of two very exciting Miles Morales costumes that you can wear within the game. The first of which is obviously the one that we've already seen in the pre-order bonuses of the tracksuit. We already saw a glimpse of this suit in action during the Game Informer coverage trailer, but seeing a full frontal shot of it in action while he's swinging just looks gorgeous. I also really like the addition of the parkour runner shoes that Miles has incorporated into the suit's design. But what's even crazier is that on top of the classic Miles Morales costume that we have already seen within the gameplay demo, as well as the two separate hoodie suits that we saw Miles wear within the previous Gone Gold tweet that Insomniac posted and the latest Daily Bugle report, and now of course the first pre-order costume of the tracksuit, we also have a stellar looking outfit which was actually on my personal top 5 picks list for Miles Morales suits. And showcasing the absolutely stunning design quality that Insomniac is capable of, we do have the 2020 comic variant suit of Miles Morales, or what a lot of people like to refer this suit as, including myself, is pretty much if Daft Punk met Spider-Man. And holy smokes, this suit looks absolutely nuts. We can also see in the background of this image that Miles appears to be in some kind of underground secret lair trying to investigate more about what they're truly working on. But as for the suit itself, I absolutely love the overall cyberpunk aesthetic that Miles has going on, especially now that Miles' mask has pretty much turned into a giant disco ball. And even though we can only see a shot of this costume from the back, it's still going to be absolutely insane when wearing this in the open world. But as we move on with the screenshots themselves, we do get some incredible looks of Miles swinging around in New York City, as well as him riding the New York City subway. Again, the detail that this game is going to have on the PS5 is going to be a mind trip, especially once you take in the higher fidelity textures and ray traced environments that will accompany Miles and the overall city of New York. This is surely going to be a staple as to what we can expect expect the PS5 to do come launch, and even furthermore down the line. And lastly, we did receive fresh looks at two main Spidey villains that are going to be featured within Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. The first of which is obviously the leader of the Underground herself, none other than the Tinkerer, where we also got some concept of her from Game Informer's magazine, where it does describe her as saying the Tinkerer's identity is unknown, but she appears to be young. So maybe that statement alone could backfire on the one theory that is going on right now, that Yuri Watanabe could potentially be this universe's version of the Tinkerer. But seeing that Insomniac is keeping the identity of the Tinkerer close to the chest, it's going to be very interesting to learn more about her as we progress through the story. And on top of all that, we also got the official confirmation that the one and only Rhino is in fact going to be featured in Miles Morales. And to put it simply, this is how character development is done. Having to run away from Rhino as a powerless Miles Morales in Spider-Man PS4 was easily one of the most intriguing missions throughout the entire game, and truly made Rhino a force to be reckoned with for your everyday New York citizen. But seeing that he's now returned in Miles Morales' story with what appears to be an upgraded version of his suit, it's going to be absolutely awesome to fight him as Miles during one of the major boss fights. And believe you me, if the Rhino boss fight in Miles Morales' game ends up looking anything like this concept art that Game Informer revealed, then my mind is simply going to explode. And speaking of the story, we also got complete full-on body model looks of the main characters of the game with none other than Miles Morales, his best friend Genki Lee, and of course the brand new next generation character model of the PS5 version of Peter Parker. I've pretty much said all that I need to say about Peter Parker's new face from Spider-Man Remastered, as well as now his inclusion in Miles Morales. I really don't like how the new character model of Peter is actually making him look younger than the current version of Miles Morales. And while I still am willing to give Ben Jordan's face model as Peter Parker a shot, I would still prefer John Bubniak any day of the week. Not to mention that it's going to feel incredibly jarring when seeing this new Peter in Miles, as well as the inevitable sequel of Marvel's Spider-Man 2, after having already been thoroughly connected to the synonymous relationship that Yuri Lowenthal and John Bubniak shared as the one and only Peter Parker. In conclusion, everyone, this is just the beginning of what Game Informer has in store for all of us Spidey fans to experience as we draw closer to the launch of Miles Morales. So if this is everything that we got of the game on day one, I can only imagine what's in store next. But with all that said, everyone, that's the video I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. What do you think about this gigantic news bomb for Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and which bit of the Game Informer coverage are you looking forward to the most? If you look back at the article itself, Andrew Reiner did describe that we will receive some very interesting developer interviews about Miles Morales. And even though this person doesn't necessarily count as a developer, I sincerely hope that we do receive an interview with Miles Morales himself of Najee Jeter. One of the best parts about Game Informer's coverage for Spider-Man PS4 was finally receiving the official confirmation that Yuri Lowenthal was playing Peter Parker in the game. And simply hearing Yuri talk about the acting process of becoming Spider-Man within this game was an absolute delight. So if we manage to receive the same thing with Najee Jeter as Miles Morales, I am going to be beyond happy. But until the next news update, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy. And without further ado, peace out.
So be sure to check out GameInformer.com/Miles or keep it locked to YouTube.com/GameInformer for a full month of exclusive content.